Everyone keeps staring at the usual suspects, waiting for a familiar monster to show up and dominate the AFC. But that's exactly why this conversation is making people uncomfortable. Because the team nobody wants to admit scares them is sitting right there, quietly stacking reasons to believe while everyone argues about tiers, seeds, and resumes. The Texans being called the scariest team in the playoffs sounds almost reckless on the surface, almost laughable to some ears, and that's precisely why it hits so hard. This isn't fear built on tradition or banners or decades of playoff scars. It's fear built on uncertainty, on the idea that you don't actually know what version of this team you're going to get and whether you're prepared for it. Stephen A. Reacting to Mad Dog's AFC tiers cracked open a truth nobody seems ready to fully confront. That the AFC isn't just wide open, it's unstable, unpredictable, and begging for a team with the right mix of defense, momentum, and belief to hijack the entire postseason. With no Mahomes in the picture, the safety net is gone, the hierarchy is broken, and suddenly teams that used to feel like automatic outs are being discussed as legitimate threats. That's where the tension lives, because fans want certainty, analysts want clean narratives, and the AFC is offering neither. Every flaw is magnified, every hot streak feels suspicious, and every confident take gets challenged immediately. And in the middle of all that noise sits Houston, not crowned, not trusted, not dismissed either, just looming, waiting for someone to blink first. That's what makes this debate feel dangerous, because once people start arguing over whether a team is scary instead of whether they're proven, you've already admitted they're in your head. Here's how this whole thing blew up and why it matters right now. Mad Dog was asked to stack the AFC contenders into tiers, and instead of delivering a clean, predictable hierarchy, he leaned into the chaos of a conference with no clear king. Pittsburgh lands in Tier 3, acknowledged as a division winner but doubted as a true Super Bowl threat. Jacksonville and Houston get grouped together in Tier 2, respected but questioned, praised for talent and criticized for inconsistency. Then Tier 1 becomes a crowded, almost uncomfortable space, filled with teams that all have arguments and all have glaring warts. Stephen A. His reaction to this setup is what ignited the conversation, because it exposed how fragile these evaluations really are, and how much fear is rooted not in dominance, but in matchups. This is why the Texans suddenly feel central to the discussion, not because everyone believes in them unequivocally, but because nobody feels safe dismissing them. And if you want to stay plugged into this kind of postseason chaos as it unfolds, make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because these debates are only going to get louder as the margins get thinner. What Mad Dog's tiers really reveal isn't disrespect or favoritism, it's hesitation. Take Pittsburgh, for example. They're acknowledged as solid, likely division winners, but there's a hard ceiling placed on them immediately. The idea that they can't win 3 playoff games, that they'd struggle even after a home win, exposes a lack of faith rooted in recent history and matchup anxiety. The concern isn't effort or coaching stability, it's whether they can survive multiple rounds against increasingly dangerous opponents. That's not an insult, it's a verdict, and it pushes them firmly into a category of teams that exist in the postseason without truly shaping it. Then comes the AFC South, and this is where things get interesting. Jacksonville is playing well, Trevor Lawrence has impressed, the coaching has stabilized, and yet there's this lingering reluctance to elevate them fully. The criticism of their home field not being intimidating, the weather not being a factor, the atmosphere lacking menace, all of that matters in January conversations. It's not just about talent, it's about whether opponents feel pressure walking into your building. Jacksonville, fairly or not, doesn't inspire that fear yet. They're respected, but respect and fear are not the same currency in the playoffs. Houston, though, is different. The Texans are discussed with a strange mix of praise and distrust. Their defense is called excellent, genuinely impactful, capable of disrupting games. At the same time, their offense is labeled inconsistent, sometimes terrible, with a run game that can disappear, and questions even around the kicking situation. There's also the haunting narrative that Houston wins one game and then gets blown out the next, a reputation built from past playoff appearances where momentum never carried forward. That's the tension that makes them scary, because when a team is simultaneously capable of shutting you down and collapsing on itself, Game planning becomes a nightmare. You don't know which version you're preparing for, and that uncertainty is poison in a single elimination format. Stephen A. His reaction lives in that discomfort. Calling a team scary isn't the same as calling them the best. It's about volatility. It's about a defense that can tilt the field, about a team that doesn't need to be perfect offensively to ruin your day. Houston doesn't have to dominate for 4 quarters to win a playoff game. They just have to control chaos better than you do. And in an AFC where everyone has warts, that matters more than polish. Tier 1 being crowded only amplifies this point. New England gets discussed as dangerous, not just because of coaching pedigree, but because of resilience. Comebacks, late-game execution, finding ways to win despite injuries, all of that feeds into playoff mythology. The Chargers are elevated because of their ceiling, because they can still theoretically grab the top seed, because Justin Herbert is considered overdue for a redemption arc after past failures. Buffalo gets treated as both the most trusted and the most frustrating. The team with the quarterback everyone believes in, but the supporting cast that sparks anxiety. Every single one of these teams comes with an asterisk, a question mark that prevents full commitment. That's why Houston stands out in this conversation, even while sitting in Tier 2. They aren't burdened by expectations of dominance. Nobody is projecting them to run the table. That freedom makes them dangerous. They're not supposed to be perfect, so when they play loose and their defense hits, the pressure shifts entirely onto the opponent. You start pressing, forcing plays, trying to score quickly, and that's exactly where Houston can capitalize. The Bills being labeled as a potential road warrior highlights another layer of this debate. The idea that the 5 seed might be the sweet spot, that Buffalo could go into Pittsburgh and feel comfortable, exposes how matchups override seeding logic. But even in praising Buffalo, concerns creep in. The offense can look off. The supporting cast feels thin compared to other contenders, and while they can run the ball effectively, the margin for error feels small. That's not confidence, that's cautious optimism. When Stephen A. pushes back, when questions get raised about why Herbert is trusted on the idea of being due while Jacksonville is told to prove it, it exposes how subjective these tiers really are. Being due isn't a stat, it's a feeling. And feelings dominate playoff discourse more than anyone wants to admit. Houston lives right in that emotional gray area. They're not trusted, but they're not dismissed. They're the team you don't want to see pop up on the bracket because they complicate your path. The discussion around offensive line injuries, defensive matchups, and styles only reinforces this. No team in the AFC is clean. Every contender has something that could unravel under postseason pressure. That's why this isn't about crowning the Texans. It's about acknowledging that they represent the kind of threat that can derail favorites. They don't need to win the Super Bowl to justify the fear. They just need to knock someone out who thought they were safe. As the conversation shifts to the 1-seed debate between Denver and New England, the chaos theme continues. Trust versus upside, experience versus momentum, coaching pedigree versus roster construction. It's all up for grabs. Nobody sounds certain. Even the picks feel reluctant, hedged, aware that one weird game could flip everything. That's the environment Houston thrives in, because uncertainty is their ally. Calling the Texans the scariest team in the playoffs isn't about predicting a championship. It's about acknowledging how uncomfortable they make the AFC feel. They're good enough to beat you, flawed enough to be underestimated, and dangerous enough to punish that mistake. In a conference where no one is dominant and everyone is vulnerable, that combination might be the most terrifying thing of all.